All right, we are here with Anthony Pierri. Anthony, thanks so much for joining us. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm super pumped about this.
Yeah, me too. And, I'm really excited about this because my team and I here at Journey Engine have been acolytes of Anthony and his account on LinkedIn. We've used your stuff for so much as far as our own business and our own positioning and our own homepage on my websites, as well as our client websites. We're going through your frameworks and everything you're recommending, and it's just been super, super helpful. So anyone watching this, definitely follow Anthony on LinkedIn, check out his website. But that said, Anthony, you want to give us a little bit of background about who you are and what you're about and what your focus is?
Yeah, absolutely. So if anyone's not familiar, we do product marketing, consulting, primarily for B2B SaaS startups, usually venture-backed, usually early stage. And we combine two different things. We help you solve for the best way to position your product, but also how to get that represented on the homepage. So oftentimes we see when people do positioning exercises, they sort of stay in the strategy land. And then when it gets passed over to execution, all of a sudden everything falls off the rails. And we'll see people making changes to the copy or to the design when in fact they're actually getting rid of some of the key decisions we made during the positioning stage. So we've seen if you can do both pieces together, if you can nail the strategy and get it visualized in a very public place like a homepage, you're just helping to set yourself up for success to align how you talk to your customers, how you talk internally with your employees, and how you talk to investors. So we've gotten a chance to work with close to 300 companies at this point, and that's me, my co-founder Robert Kaminsky, and our copywriter Kate Guerrero. So the three of us together make up Fletch PMM. There's no real big team behind the scenes. We're doing the work day in and day out with each of these founding teams, and it's been a super fun, wild ride. As you saw, a lot of our traction comes from LinkedIn. That's primarily where we post our content, our frameworks, and ideas, and that's usually where we find the companies that are struggling with these types of problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, your frameworks for doing these things you're talking about are so helpful and really simple to understand and follow, which is something I love and really like about it. You mentioned a lot about positioning. I'd like to kind of focus in on that for a second. Taking a step back, how would you define product positioning in the context of an early stage SaaS business?
Yeah, so product positioning is answering four basic questions. What is your product? Who is it for? What does it replace? And why is it better? It's effectively the elevator pitch. If you met someone at a networking event and they said, what is your product? What's your company? If you can answer those four questions, you have effectively positioned your product in the mind of your customer. You're trying to choose meaningful reference points that will help them understand the value, get what it is that you do and why it's better and why they might consider it. And so it's really a holistic view about how you talk about your product, ultimately to try to get a place where you can live in their brains, that when they are struggling with the problem that you solve, they say, oh, what about those guys? I remember that they had that product that is specifically built for this exact moment. That's kind of like the outcome of positioning in a good way, is if you can come up in that moment, be remembered for the thing that you hope to be remembered for, so that they're going to ideally reach out to you and then maybe buy you and become a customer.
Definitely. And this is obviously something that's critically important at the early stages. This is probably one of the first things, if not the first thing, that they're going to do as far as their go-to-market strategy. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, it's definitely one of the first. I mean, ideally, they're doing some amount of product strategy and validation with customers that this is like a real problem, all that type of lean startup goodness that we love and have learned to appreciate over the years. That's obviously very early, but then once they start to bring it to market, they have gone through some beta rounds with different customers. Maybe they have some design partners who are helping them figure out what they should build, all that kind of stuff. Then once they bring it to market, and the moment that they need a website where they have to actually people will experience them without having just a founder who's talking to them, doing founder-led sales. Once you abstract away that founder, you ideally want to be doing some level of product positioning through even something as simple as a website, right? And what we'll find is that when people are doing the early days, before they've kind of found the angle that they want to go to market with, they're basically doing product positioning bespoke for every single person that they talk to. So like the founder, when they're talking to the initial customers, they may position themselves, choose 4 different answers when they talk to one enterprise customer. Then maybe they talk to an SMB and they choose 4 different answers. So that still will exist even as the company gets bigger. Salespeople will do a good job of kind of honing in or sharpening the positioning for specific audiences. So that never really goes away, but you do want to have a product positioning that kind of lives in the market. That's the first thing most people think of when they think of you. Like a product like Figma, it was positioned as a interface design tool when they went to market. And there was this angle where it was like, we are a collaborative interface design tool. It allowed multiple product designers to edit the same file over the internet, which wasn't really possible with Adobe XD and Sketch and other products like that. So for them, they had this primary product positioning that they went to market with. Obviously, if they encountered an engineer who was thinking about bringing in Figma or a product manager, they might phrase it a little differently. They might say it's for a slightly different use case, call a category something different. But that didn't change that they went to market with one main primary product positioning that ideally makes it really easy to remember what Figma is and what they do and who they're for and all that type of stuff.
Absolutely. So the Figma case is definitely interesting. Would you say that's kind of the difference between a sales-led company and a product-led company is really that positioning, or is that one of the big differences?
Yeah, it's definitely a difference for sure. Although sales-led companies should also still have a primary product positioning, what we'll often see happening, especially, and this is a problem, right? You can close deals that you should not close. Like all revenue is not created equal. And so what we will often find is that when a company has a weak product positioning, they don't quite know who they're for, the salespeople will bend reality in order to make it seem like the product is one thing when it really isn't. And then all they're really doing is kicking the can down to maybe customer success or whoever that's going to pick up the pieces once the customer turns, because they're going to say, I thought this was something completely different. Sales helped me see it in this one way, when in reality, you guys are completely different now that I'm in the product and we want to leave. Salesperson doesn't really care because they got their commission. They brought in the people, right? And so what we see is that the weak product positioning ends up hurting kind of everyone. The product managers too will hear back from sales, hey, we need to add this feature because these enterprise people want it to look a certain way because of how they positioned it in the sales call. And then other salespeople were saying, no, we need to add these features because these SMBs over here, they wanted completely different features because we positioned it differently. And so the product gets pulled in a bunch of different directions on the engineering side. And then on the actual sales side, right, the same thing, like once the people get adoption, are they at risk of churning because of how it was positioned in a very bespoke way? So PLG and sales-led, they still have the same challenge. Obviously, with a PLG product, maybe there's less variability because there's no salesperson who's going to pull it one way or the other. But again, if you have weak product positioning, you'll get the same issue. People will think they're signing up for a product that does one thing, when in reality, it doesn't, right? And that sometimes could fall more on marketing. What is marketing saying? And we always see big butting heads between marketing and product managers, where PMs are like, why did you make all these claims that we could do all these things on the site when we can't do any of these things? And it's like, well, we wanted to get them to convert, conversion rates through the roof. And they're like, yeah, but activation is, super, super low. So you have to use this product positioning as a way to align all the different departments so that you're getting this holistic picture and you're pointing the company towards the right group of people.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I know that your focus is on early stage SaaS companies, if I understand correctly. And there's a lot of different types of SaaS companies at all stages of growth, especially the differences between like a bootstrapped SaaS company and a venture-backed SaaS company. We're seeing a big emergence of the micro SaaS space and a lot of new bootstrap companies. Would you say that your framework or your strategy for positioning would be different between these types of companies and between their different stages of growth?
Well, the funny thing is, we don't work with nearly as many bootstrap companies because they usually don't have the same problem as venture-backed companies. When you start from the mindset of how do I make a profitable business, you actually don't make all the dumb decisions that VC-backed companies often do. Because if someone just hands me $50 million, I now have to figure out how I'm going to justify this crazy growth that I promised. So I need to go after a bunch of different markets at once. I need to stretch the product in as many ways as I can. I need to add, new products and all sorts of stuff. And so people will often create these unmarketable behemoths that are Frankenstein creations. Nobody can understand what they are. They can't market them. They can't explain it because their ambitions got so far beyond reality. Where like the best VC-backed companies over the years, like let's take Amazon. Famously, Jeff Bezos in the beginning was like, I'm going to sell everything you can imagine, but he went to market around just selling books. He knew I'm not going to be able to position like I'm this giant $1 trillion company when I'm very, very small. I need to get the traction first and then expand. VC-backed companies today, they don't always get that idea. So what ends up happening is they position like they're the $100 million company when they are only doing $500,000 in annual recurring revenue and they got a team of 10 people. So bootstrap companies and micro SaaS companies, because there's no expectation that they need to become this $1 billion behemoth, they will just go to market way smarter. They'll be like, oh, we could just go after this group. There's a bunch of those people. They love our product. We can make a ton of money. And for them, a ton of money might be 5 million ARR or 10 million ARR. And that feels like to a VC company, that's like a failure. You're only doing 10 million. Like what? This is what a waste, because they're looking for something to justify the investment to make back the money from the fund. But a bootstrap company is like, we got 10 people. We're doing $20 million a year. Like we are fabulously wealthy beyond our wildest dreams, and our margins are through the roof, and we take advantage of everything that SaaS has to offer, where the VC companies are constantly just trying to become profitable at all, right? They're like underwater. Like it's something like OpenAI loses $1 billion, billions of dollars every single month. And they need to do that to get to scale. And I understand it. It's just a very different business model. So when we see bootstrap companies, they don't really reach out to us because they're like, I don't even understand the problem that you're solving. Like I just, we built the product for these logistics managers. We go to market for them and they buy it and they love it. And that's the end of the story. Versus on the other side, they're like, we've built a product for every possible thing you could imagine, and we're having trouble bringing it to market to the whole world all at once. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's going to be challenging.
Interesting. So would you say that the positioning strategy should probably be the same between these, VC-backed companies and these bootstrap companies, but the bootstrap companies tend to just get it. They get that they have to position for a niche, for a small niche, and then maybe expand from there. Whereas some of these VC-backed companies are going too big too soon as far as positioning, too wide instead of, going deep on a certain niche. And the bootstrap companies just seem to get that quicker. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you'll see bootstrap companies, they don't make a lot of the weird choices that VC-backed companies do. Like there's all this talk about category creation. We need to create a category, and they spend all these times in these seminars where they're, brainstorming phrases, and there's like a whole methodology around this category creation thing. Bootstrap companies don't do that because they're like, I need to make money now. I can't waste all this time like doing this weird like thought experiment, like dream journal-esque stuff to create this category that I'm going to dump. Bootstrap companies are like, how are we going to go get some more clients? Like, let's get some customers and make some more money and be a profitable business. So yeah, they definitely get it a lot faster. And obviously, there's times where the VC model really makes sense. OpenAI probably could not have gotten off the ground bootstrapped, right? SpaceX, you can't really bootstrap your way to satellites and rockets that launch and relaunch and all that stuff. So there are examples, Uber, where you have to get these giant network effects going for it to work. Although you could argue some of those ones even still aren't really working so many years into it. They're still not really being profitable. And maybe it was a business model fundamental problem. But yes, your summary was perfect.
Got it. Definitely. So another issue I want to talk about is kind of the battle that goes on sometimes between branding and positioning. So brand marketers tend to want to do one thing, and it doesn't always agree with the best strategy for positioning. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so here's how we separate the two. And every time we post about this, we get Angry people on all sides. The brand marketers get mad. The product marketers get mad. But if you really, we've artificially created all these different groupings. The perfect company, if it was possible, would be run by one person, because your product strategy, your go-to-market strategy, all the marketing and everything in a perfect world is the same thing. You're just looking at the same thing from different angles. We've artificially separated them into these different departments because we have to, because of scale, right? You just can't have one person doing everything. You need to split it up. So if you were going to take brand marketing and product marketing and truly separate them, knowing that in reality, there's massive overlap of both these disciplines. But if you were trying to say, what are things that are distinctly related to brand marketing and distinctly related to product marketing? The difference is that you will see brand marketing is more talking about, surprise, surprise, the brand. And when I say brand, I mean the company, right? Like when you say there's so many great brands out there, you're saying there's so many great companies. So brand marketing is marketing the brand or marketing the company, where product marketing is marketing, you guessed it, the product. And those sometimes in an early stage company are the same thing. When you have an early stage company with one product, the brand and the product are effectively like the Venn diagram is they're both overlaid to each other. But very quickly, companies, as they start to grow, will get multiple products. They will get multiple segments and serve lots of different use cases. All of a sudden, when we are marketing now, Nike, we are no longer necessarily doing product marketing. When you see a billboard that says, just do it, with the Nike swoosh, that is marketing Nike. It's not marketing the Air Jordans, a product. So in general, that's kind of how you think about it. When you're doing brand positioning, you are saying, how would we position the company relative to other companies in the market, relative to, the desires of the customer, all those types of things. Where you're doing product positioning, you're answering the similar questions, but at a product level. And so ideally, those things are working hand in hand and everything kind of lives in its right place. There's companies that will invest, especially in SaaS, they'll invest a lot of money in doing a branded podcast. So they'll say, say it's a product for, demand gen people. If you launch a demand gen podcast where you have thought leaders come in and be on the podcast, you're not really talking about your products or the problems they solve necessarily in the podcast week in, week out, but you're borrowing credibility from everyone who comes on the podcast, which ultimately creates awareness and potentially trust for the brand. So when a salesperson goes out and cold emails, hey, I'm emailing from X company, they've actually heard of the company because of the stuff that brand marketers were doing, which is great. That makes it so much easier to get an intro because I heard of you guys. I've seen your, funny commercials you run in the Super Bowl, the Super Bowl ad. That's amazing. The Super Bowl ad might not actually talk about any products at all. And most of the Super Bowl ads of especially software companies, they never mention any products at all. It's this is what IBM stands for, brand marketing. So long answer to your question, but that is really how we see those things as separate, but ultimately knowing that they always are going to touch each other. You're never going to have a product marketing asset that isn't also doing brand marketing, but you can have brand marketing that isn't necessarily doing product marketing.
Interesting. I actually hadn't really looked at it that way. That's an interesting way to look at it for sure. So I've seen you post on this before. I guess some of the conflict that might happen is between a brand marketer and a product marketer on, say, the main headline of the website. Are you going to talk about something about the overall company and what it's about, or specifically about the benefits of the product and why people should buy it? Is that kind of fair to say?
Yep. And it's funny because you would expect, as companies get bigger, they do more brand marketing on the homepage. And that is true sometimes. But the biggest companies don't actually do that. Take a look at Apple. The whole hero, the above the fold of their website is almost always a product. It's here's the iPhone. It's not, this is what Apple stands for, right? Here's a summary about all the things that Apple does. It's almost always a product. Microsoft, if you go on their website, it's usually whatever the thing is that they're pushing at that point. And it really comes down to how do people use websites? What's the whole, the medium is the message, that old adage. What are people going on websites for? It's usually not, I really want to go on a website to be inspired. I want to get amped up. That's why I'm going to go visit a website. People visit websites to get information, and they usually want information on a product. And so the biggest companies, when you look at how many visits they get, right? It's hundreds of millions on Apple or Microsoft. They're like, what do we want to do with these hundreds of millions of people? Do we want to try to inspire them? Or do we want to try to answer questions about our products and ideally get them to buy? So like in general, I think that something like a homepage should be more in the bucket of what a product marketer does. There's obviously examples that are exceptions to this rule. There's certain companies that do such complex stuff that there isn't even really like one product. It's like almost more like consulting. And so in those ones, there's no real product to show. Like if I go on Deloitte or McKinsey, there's not like one wedge product that you go to them for. So for them, you probably have to do brand marketing. That's kind of leading the charge. But if you are selling products, like, and someone comes to your website, it might be advantageous to just tell them about the products and help them understand, because that's probably why they're there.
Absolutely. So that makes good sense. I would totally agree about doing product positioning rather than brand positioning on the homepage in the vast majority of cases, especially in the B2B SaaS space. Brand marketing aside, assuming we've decided to use product positioning on the homepage, I know that you post a lot about the different categories of product positioning and the different types of product positioning that you might use in different cases. Can you give us an idea about different cases that you might use different types of positioning?
Yeah, in our framework, and there's lots of frameworks, right? There's people who do positioning and they have their own templates and stuff. So we have a model that we use where we basically say, you're trying to answer the question, first and foremost, what is it? What is the product? If you cannot answer that question, everything else doesn't really matter. And usually you'll be surprised, but most companies don't answer what is it. There's many ways to not answer what is it, right? If I say, what's your product? And you answer with an outcome, right? What's a great way to make your team more efficient? I didn't actually answer what is the product. I'm like, okay, well, but what is it, right? I can answer and say my like investor pitch, my vision, like what is your product? Well, it's a way to really democratize, the logistics industry. Like that's something I would say to an investor, and they're like, wow. But again, if I'm a customer, I'm like, cool. I love that you have that vision. What is it though? What's the product? There's really only two ways to answer what is it that are substantive enough that would leave people like, I get it. And then you could start talking about differentiation and value and outcomes and all that stuff. And these represent two different positioning strategies. One we would call a category-based positioning approach, and the other we would call a use case-based positioning approach. The category approach is extremely simple. You just say, when someone says, what is it? You just say what category you're in. What is Pipedrive? It's a CRM. What's HubSpot? It's a CRM. These are all ways to just get over the hump of what is it. This only works if you use a category that's real and not something pretend. So like, for example, for a while, DocuSign said that they were e-signature software. Real category. Everyone's like, I know exactly what that is. It's been around since the 90s or something. Decades people have had this. So you say, oh, we're a new e-signature software. Cool. What makes you different than X? And now we're in a good discussion about value and differentiation. Later, as they've gotten probably higher paid marketing execs coming in, now they're publicly traded, they say, we're intelligent agreement management, which is like, I don't know what that is because you guys made it up. So that doesn't actually answer what is it. So the category approach only works if you stay a real category. And what that does then is it allows us to frame the argument of the competition. What's your competitive alternative in a category-based approach? It's the other vendors in the category. If I say I'm a new web browser, all of a sudden, my competitors are pretty much known. Chrome, Safari, Firefox. So you have to answer what makes you different than those ones. On the flip side, there are certain companies that are doing something newer that don't really fall into a category. So we like the example is Calendly. That's how we booked this call, was on Calendly. When Calendly launched, there was no such category called a scheduling tool. So if I'm Calendly in the beginning and I say, we make scheduling software or a scheduling tool, they'd be like, scheduling for what? What does that mean? Versus if I say a use case, which is like an activity that someone would do, that you would say, oh, that activity is a great use case for Calendly. You answer and you would say, oh, Calendly, it's a software that we made, and it basically helps you schedule meetings with people online without having to send back and forth emails. I've effectively framed a use case for my software that avoids the category question, but still adequately answers what is Calendly. So someone say, interesting. And in that framing, your competitive alternatives are likely not other scheduling software because you're probably in a new emerging category that people haven't really heard of. The competitive alternatives in that framing are things like an assistant who would schedule for you, doing it yourself, just sending emails back and forth, trying to find the right time, all sorts of different things like that. So in general, those are kind of the two approaches, and then those can get framed in a pretty clear way on your homepage. And you'll see this, right? Like the Figma example you said before, their headline was the collaborative interface design tool. That's a category-based argument saying we're different than the other vendors who do interface design because we're collaborative. And Calendly, for a long time, had a version of this on their website. It was the best way to schedule meetings online, something like that, framed by the use case, positioned against other ways that people perform that activity.
Super interesting. Definitely really interesting. And I've seen a lot of your content on those different categories of positioning, and the way you lay it out visually with the infographics is super interesting and helpful. So I want to go into another area. I know that designing value propositions is one of the biggest parts of positioning and something that you talk a lot about. I know there's some confusion with a lot of marketers about the difference between their offer and their value proposition. Can you talk to us a little bit about those two things, what they are and why they're different from each other?
Yeah, and honestly, it depends how people are defining these terms. And this is one of the big issues, is that we're all trying to describe the same underlying reality. You know, we're all looking at the same type of stuff, and we all use different words to explain the underlying reality. And a lot of times we will use the same words, but in different ways. So the way that we would define those two things, we probably would fundamentally explain them in the same way. That the value proposition and the offer are probably, in our view, would be more interchangeable. And really, it's the end-to-end statement. And we have like multiple elements that make up, like atomic elements that would make up a value proposition. It really is like, if we are talking about a use case or a category as the main thing we're anchoring around, then the value propositions are basically saying, what's the competitive alternative? What's the problem with the competitive alternative? And then what do you do differently, which would be, we frame it in these three subcategories: a capability, a feature, and a benefit. And so for an example would be, let's take something like Slack. Start with one of the features of channels, right? A channel, what do you do with a channel with these hashtags, right? How you explain that feature of channels would be what we would call a capability, which is what can I do with that channel feature? And so you might say something like, have all of your team's conversations about a specific topic in one place, right? That would maybe be the product capability related to the feature. And then ultimately the benefit is like, well, why would that matter? It's like, so you don't have to go looking for, where the last conversation was. And so that's like on your side of the equation. And it's like, what problem does that solve? You bring in, it depends which competitive alternative you've chosen. Let's say you're positioned against email, which is kind of what Slack did, right? Slack was more of a use case-based approach. It was like, let's talk about how do we communicate with our team, use case. Most people use email. That's a competitive alternative. We're a new thing, right? A different type of product category altogether. So if you take something like Slack and you say, it's for communicating with your team, most people do it with email. The problem is you have all these separate threads, and it's really easy to lose what's going on. Then we pop over to our side and we say, Slack is amazing because you can have these channels feature that allow you to have conversations in these specific places where all of our files and things live, capability, ultimately so you don't end up losing the information like you would in the email. And it's really like the benefit and the problem are kind of mirror images of each other. It's like, here's how we solve that problem, and then the opposite of that would be the product benefit. And so for us, like the value proposition would be the string of those things together, right? Basically the scenario that you're in, the competitive alternative, the problem, and then the capability, the feature, and the benefit. That whole end-to-end piece would be like the value proposition. The offer might be one level abstracted out of like the product as a whole like what's the situation, the competitive alternative, and what's wrong with that, and how does the product as a whole solve these things, where a value prop might be deeper in. But again, these things are all levels. Like you could have a product level value proposition. So we don't find that it's helpful to split those two things. We would use them probably more interchangeably. It's more important that you realize either one of those things kind of needs all those elements, right? Some people are like, the value prop is, increased visibility. And it's like, yeah, maybe that's the tip of the spear. Maybe that's the most compelling part of the value prop. But if you cut out all those other aspects, you're just talking about maybe a benefit or a business outcome, not the full end-to-end value proposition.
Definitely. So yeah, all those different components you talked about are super interesting, and they're different for every product depending on how the market looks and depending on how the product itself looks. And I guess that's just the beauty of putting together a positioning strategy. And there's a lot of buzzwords and people get confused. And to throw another kind of buzzword at you, another buzz acronym, the ICP, Ideal Customer Profile, obviously another super important component of positioning. How would you say that comes into your framework in terms of developing a positioning strategy, in terms of developing a value proposition? Do you start with working on the ICP and that helps your value proposition? Does the value proposition help refine the ICP? Can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah. At a high level, an ICP is the ideal customer profile of someone who would be a great fit for your product. And depending on who you talk to, they may say you need certain levels of segmentation to really constitute an ICP, right? You need to have firmographics. You need to say it's companies of this size. It's whatever. That's not really true. ICPs, you can set the altitude wherever you want. Like, to give you a funny example, there's a company called Small PDF. When they went to market, you would upload a PDF to their site to say you had a 30 megabyte PDF with big images. And then Small PDF, big shocker, they would shrink it and you could export it and it preserves the quality. And now you've got a 5 megabyte PDF that you can email. Their ICP, to be honest, at the beginning was probably just people who were trying to shrink PDFs and would Google it, right? Because they used an SEO-based strategy where they wanted to have people who were Googling, how do I shrink a PDF? And then they appear, and they, to this day, I think, get like 45 million visits a month. Now, maybe they narrowed down further to say, well, certain types of people upload way more PDFs than others. And so maybe that was like their more narrow version. But again, no real firmographics. They don't really care if these people are coming from big business or small business at the outset. They don't really care if they're sales or marketing or, ops or whatever the team is. So in general, you need to segment in some way in order to make an effective marketing communication. To do distribution where you bring your product to someone, you need to have some type of segmentation. Does it need to have these 10 different buckets? No, it's going to be different for every company how you do it. So it's more important that you have an ICP in your mind than to not have an ICP. And more often or not, the people's problem is not that it's too specific, it's that it's too vague. Like they say, my ICP is companies, of 50,000 employees. It's like, okay, well, is that really going to get you there? Like usually you need to either bring in a use case and attach that as part of the ICP, or you need to say it's like the category approach, right? Companies that would use a CRM, shopping for CRMs. If you're going to do like a category-based approach where you're saying we're going to be the best CRM, it's like you probably need to know who's shopping for CRMs and want to tailor your market for those types of companies. So they definitely do refine each other from both sides. Once you have like the idea of what the product's going to do, there will be certain groups of people who care about it more, but how you group them together is such a nuanced process that there isn't like a one size fits all. Everyone's ICP should make sure you talk about the size of the company, the revenue per year, because sometimes that doesn't matter. It's just not a factor. And sometimes it is. Sometimes it's extremely important and it's the core thing. Like we really only work if you're making $50 million a year. That's the only people who would buy us because of whatever factors. Like Palantir sells to governments and giant corporations. They're not, going to SMB. So there's no one using it unless they're giant. So for them, size and complexity and things like those would make up a big portion of their ICP.
Definitely makes good sense. So early stage SaaS companies, whether it's a venture-backed company or a bootstrap company, it can be pretty intimidating to just jump into a market, especially if there are huge competitors that are playing in that space, and very well-funded competitors and startups, and depending on the number of startups that are competing in a certain space that are arguably doing something similar or serving a similar purpose. How would you say early stage startups want to navigate this, and is there anything you can give them that's helpful in terms of framing the early stage positioning strategy?
Yeah, for sure. So if they're very early and they're about to jump into a super saturated market, I would maybe say don't build something else. Like if they haven't gone too far down, like it's not too late to pivot. I think Y Combinator, I think it's them who say this, but they were like, right when the pandemic started, everyone started making video chat software because they were like, this is a great opportunity. It's a gold rush. And Zoom ultimately was the winner because they had been working on video chat software for years before it was the hot thing to build. So they were like, the best time to build a video chat software for a pandemic, like what's the best time to start it? They were like maybe 5 or 6 years before the pandemic started, because then you're perfectly positioned to do it. And people like OpenAI and, Google and these people doing LLM and stuff, like they've been working on it for really, really long. So is this a smart thing as an early stage company to jump in and be like, I'm going to take on OpenAI because it's a big opportunity? And it's like, do you have any real competitive advantage? Probably not. So in general, there's only so many ways that you can differentiate and carve out a space for yourself. And most of them are just not available to early stage companies. Like pricing is one way that people will carve out a space for them. Like I will do what the big guys are doing, but way cheaper. Like you could argue that's what HubSpot is kind of doing to Salesforce. Like they are eating Salesforce's lunch when it comes to SMB, because to get Salesforce off the ground as an SMB, you have to do an implementation partner, which is like 10, 15 grand. HubSpot, you could get started in an afternoon for $50 a user. These are not comparable. And so having a way cheaper price is one aspect, right? Having a 10x better product, that's another one where people always talk about, if you could really bring some sort of new thing. Like Figma was in a saturated market, but it was truly a 10x better product because they leveraged the power of the internet in the way that the big players were not doing. And so they had this angle that allowed them to gain a foothold in a really saturated market. But most of the time, people don't have those levers at their disposal. And so the remaining thing, and this is why we see so many micro SaaS and bootstrap companies becoming more prevalent, is verticalizing, is saying, well, yeah, I'm not going to make the horizontal platform for everyone, like big Silicon Valley darling that's raised 100 million to go to market for all the industries at once. But I could make it for one specific industry that I have domain expertise in, and I could create a product that was really great for them. There's a huge rise of vertical SaaS companies that are doing great. They're killing it. You wouldn't hear about them because you're not reading what's going on in trucking. You're not reading what's going on in deep tech and things like that. So verticalized solutions is a strategy that is available to all, right? You don't have to have deep VC pockets to carve out a significant differentiation, because it's right there, right? You look at the difference between Square, the point of sale, you swipe your card at the Square terminal. We'll make that for everyone. And then Toast, which said, what if we just make it for restaurants? Way easier, points the whole company in one direction. Product strategy questions are all kind of answered. How do we make this better for restaurants? They don't have to be thinking, how do we make it better for restaurants without alienating these 27 other industries that we serve? They can just focus on one. And then it's immediate differentiation when you get in a head-to-head battle. Even when Square is the market leader, you go to a restaurant and they say, well, why would I pick you over Square? Square is for anyone. Toast is just for restaurants. The whole company was built for you. Everything that Square would get wrong, we've already thought through and gotten right. So in general, that's what we usually say for early stage companies. If you're going to get off the ground, it helps to narrow down, build for a specific niche, And then once you get traction, you can always broaden out. It's way easier to broaden later than it is to start super broad, not really get traction. Like it's much more painful to try to narrow after you've already been going all over the place. So we're like, don't worry about starting narrow. If Amazon can go from becoming a bookstore to the everything store, like you'll be fine. You can broaden later.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's the answer I was looking for. So you mentioned HubSpot is eating Salesforce's lunch by focusing on SMB, and even bootstrap startups can take a page out of that book by going even deeper on an even smaller ICP, on an even smaller niche. So, whereas HubSpot is the CRM for SMBs, an even more niche play for a smaller budget and an earlier stage bootstrap startup could be a CRM for marketing agencies, or a CRM for marketing agencies who only serve tech companies or tech startups, or, you just go deeper and smaller. And so, the bigger companies, the more well-funded companies who are tackling a bigger piece of the market, they just can't focus that small. So you can eat their lunch on those smaller parts of the market. And then as you dominate, you can expand from there and eat their lunch on more things, I guess.
There's lots of examples of this, right? Like this is the private equity playbook. They buy a company that's doing decent and they say, what 20% of customers make up 80% of the revenue? And then they just chop off the other 80%, focus the whole company at 20, and then grow the company 5x and then sell it. Like it's a very common playbook, but in the tech world, they're like, it's so anti to the core of like, we're trying to build $1 billion business. How could you ever lop off other customer types? So it's like private equity is doing this. There's that famous book called The Innovator's Dilemma, which is like large enterprises will not go after small opportunities that end up becoming big opportunities because they're not big enough. Like there's a YouTuber, Marquez Brownlee, he does like good reviews of tech and stuff. And he was talking about this too. And he's saying like with Apple, like Apple is not going to take a $50 million opportunity. They're not going to be like, ooh, we have to devote time and resources to getting $50 million because when you're worth multiple trillions, like that's a drop in the bucket. So they're like, what should we do this year? Let's be a bank now. And they're doing giant plays. But that leaves so much opportunity for the little guys to be like, well, shoot, if I could make $50 million, like that would be incredible. That's that's generational changing money for me and everyone in my little high margin company, right? So it's like there are so many opportunities that the big companies will just never go after because they're too small. But for any regular person who wants to be an entrepreneur, it's more money than you could ever dream of.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, you mentioned that bootstrap companies and smaller companies tend to get this a little bit more, but a lot of the companies I'm working with, they even struggle with this. So they're afraid to go too deep, too niche. They feel it's too small. And a lot of the time they don't understand how big the opportunity is in something that seems very small. And it's actually what they should be doing. So a lot of companies need coaching on this, even the little guys. And I think it's an important concept to start very niche and expand from there, especially as it relates to messaging. Taking a step back, I'm just wondering, in your opinion, when it comes to these early stage startups, are there any big mistakes that you see a lot of them making on your end?
A lot of the same themes we've talked about, right? Going too wide too soon. There's something to be said about experimenting across a lot of different things. Like when we launched our own consultancy, we experimented with a lot of ideas for 6 to 9 months. We were basically saying, should we go into PLG stuff? Should we try to do onboarding flows? Should we do pricing consulting? And we were like, whatever we pick, there's probably a big market for it. And it was only after a while that we uncovered this need for homepages, for positioning and things like that. So sometimes there is something to be said for a period where you are going broad, but it's like pre-go-to-market broad, right? It's like, let's go and experiment before we go to market. And then once we found some interest and traction, let's go to market. And that's the point when you want to be specific to say, all right, I only have one marketing person. I've done my experimentation. I know that there's lots of opportunities. We're going to take a bet on this one. And I'm going to try to get the most efficient distribution I can from my small team and limited budget. And I'm not going to spray it in 10 different ways. I'm going to point it at one direction. So like the pre-go-to-market experimentation is really important. But then post, when you're actually going to start spending money and time and resources, that's when you just don't want to be so inefficient. And we see that time and time again, companies that are trying to go to market all over the place. And they're like, we can't get traction anywhere. And I'm like, that's because you got one person. And the one person is just stretched in 10 different directions. And it's like, it took me and my co-founder, like 20 to 30 hours a week for a while just on marketing for one segment to get traction. And then eventually we got it. Both of us have relatively large audiences now and have a really healthy pipeline of clients that come in just through inbound. But that wasn't something that I could, like if I had also been testing, trying to go to market on multiple different channels for different groups, like it wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't have gotten traction anywhere. And that's us who, this is our main gig is marketing. And so, especially when you have founders who are not marketing background and they don't understand what it takes to get something off the ground from like a distribution standpoint. Like getting any channel working is going to take minimum a quarter. So they're like, well, why don't we do outbound sales and we'll do event marketing and we'll do thought leadership and we'll do SEO. And it's like every single one of those channels is going to take at least a quarter, and a quarter of someone's dedicated time to get it working. And then add the complexity of we want to do these for multiple different segments, right? We want to do this for logistics and retail and fintech and all of these things. The complexity is just going through the roof. And so it's no wonder you see so many early stage startups that are just floundering, and they're like, look at your website. Like you haven't chosen. You've got your tentacles pointed in all these different ways, but you don't have the firepower to back it up.
Yeah, so interesting. And I love that you use your own company, your own consultancy as a case study here. And it's really nice to see companies who eat their own cooking, so to speak. So you have gone super niche with homepage design for early stage startups. So you mentioned there's a few different ways to niche down. You could niche down by industry. You could niche down by the type of service, the type of product you're offering. So a lot of ways to do this. And again, it's awesome that you have a great case study in your own business. Can you think of any other businesses, maybe a client of yours or, another case where it's an early stage startup that has done a really good job of positioning in this way and had a really good result?
Yeah. I mean, there's tons of them, right? Like you can look at all the great success stories. Many of them started this way, that they were very, very niche to start and then broadened, right? If you go far enough back on most of these companies, they really all were kind of doing this. And there's some obviously that are different that we've talked about that go wide, right? But we've got like a pretty good library on our website. If you go on fletchpmm.com, it's like a before and after library, and you'll see a lot of these companies will show examples of like, this is the super broad version, then this is the really narrow version. And a lot of them have come back to us and been like, this has really helped. And we're seeing all these traction now that we've narrowed it down to the specific focus. So it's a very common theme. When they bite the bullet and they actually do it, like they start to see things really, really kick in.
Any other resources that you want to point folks to get your frameworks or anything else that you would recommend?
You hit all the good ones, like the big ones for sure. And I would say if you want to connect with me directly, shoot me a connect request on LinkedIn, and I accept pretty much everyone. And I'll probably send you a DM. People always accuse me of using automations because I will respond pretty quick to someone who added me, but it's just embarrassing because I'm basically on the platform all day and I'm doing it by hand. And like, no way did you answer that fast. I'm like, I'm sorry, man. I'm a loser. I'm on this platform all day. So happy to connect with you.
Yeah, I'm just curious, what's next for you and Fletch? Anything exciting in the woodwork?
Yeah, I mean, right now we're really just still focusing in on operationalizing, dialing in our process as good as it can be. And then once we get that into a good spot, then we will talk about potential other avenues, right, that we could expand. It's an ongoing open question of like, what would be the second thing that we would do after homepage positioning? And lots of options, but nothing has jumped out. It's like, this is what we've got to do.
Awesome. Well, Anthony, that's all the questions I have for right now. You mentioned you can find you at fletchpmm.com. Again, definitely follow Anthony's LinkedIn and check him out. Anthony, it was a great chat. I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much for coming.
Definitely. Thanks so much for having me.